Hello, welcome to this episode of Easy Learning. My name is Helen and today I'll be teaching you science. Now today's lesson is going to be a fantastic one. We'll be learning about temperature. Yes, temperature. I'll be teaching you what is temperature, how we can get different examples of where we use temperature in our everyday life. And today's lesson is going to be a fantastic one because you'll be learning some wow words. And I'm going to teach you how to spell temperature. Well, that's the lesson, so get ready to learn something exciting. Good. Now let's start off with today's lesson. As usual, you know what to do. Go and get your pens and your notepads, get to somewhere quiet, pay attention, and let's get ready to learn something new in our science lesson. Okay, now let's start off with today's lesson. Like we said earlier, we're learning about temperature, okay? And before we start the lesson, let's know, what is temperature? Do you have any ideas? Let's find out. So, if you had a normal day at school and someone said, what is temperature? What would be your response? What would be your answer? What do you think temperature is? You must have heard about temperature at school, or probably when you went to the hospital to see the GP and they said, temperature, your temperature is this, your temperature is that. Or one of those days you weren't feeling too well and mom or dad came and put their hands on you and they're like, oh, your temperature is really high. What do they mean by that? Well, let's find out. What is temperature? So we'll start off with writing a topic on our board. Okay, I'm going to say temperature. So that's our spelling of the word. We have T-E-M-P-E-R-A-T-U-R-E. Temperature. All right, that's what it is. Temperature. Now don't worry if you write your E's like this or you write your E's like I do. It's an E, okay? So that's how you spell temperature. So I'm just going to quickly wipe that off because we don't need that now. And then we can start off with our lesson for today, learning about temperature. Okay, so what is temperature? It is the degree or the amount of heat present in a person. That's what temperature means. It is the degree, or if a degree is a big word for you, you can say it's the amount of heat present in a person, substance, or object. The amount of heat present in a person, substance, or object. So if someone said, what is temperature? And you had to write it down. All right. So the key word is heat. You're looking at the amount of heat. So that measurement or the degree of heat is what we now know as temperature. All right. Now, temperature tells us how hot or cold something is. So if I want to know if something is really hot or really cold, then I'm referring to the thing's temperature. All right. So when we want to find out if something is hot or cold, we can ask, what is the temperature? Okay. So if I was relating to a subject and said, not a subject, let me say an object, and I'm like, okay, what is the temperature of this object? I'm only asking how hot or how cold is this object. Okay, what's the amount of heat that I can feel on or in this object? Now that's what temperature means. Simple, right? Now, how can we measure the amount of heat in something? If I ask about how much heat is on this thing or in this thing, how are you supposed to know? All right, even if I touch it, I can say, okay, it's very hot, or it's very cold, or it's really, really hot. But there must be a better way to measure it instead of just saying it's hot or cold, or it's very hot, or it's a little bit cold. All right, so what kind of instrument can we use to measure the amount of heat in something? The instrument is called a thermometer. Yes, we use a thermometer. All right, and that's how it's spelled. A thermometer. Okay, so we use a thermometer to measure the amount of heat you find in something. All right. Now, these are instruments used to measure the amount of heat that you can find in, let's say, something that's boiling, something that's freezing, something that is really hot, something that might be cold. When you're talking about temperature, you're immediately talking about a thermometer. All right. Now, you remember when you go to visit the GP, or sometimes at school, you go to the school hospital, maybe you're not feeling too well, you've eaten something that isn't making you feel so comfortable, and you feel that you might not be feeling as well as you want to feel, and you go to see the GP, or you go to the school hospital, and then the GP takes out this instrument and checks you. Maybe he puts it in your mouth, or he puts it under your arms, and he's checking for something. All right, he's most probably checking for your temperature. All right, that's one of the first checks that the GP normally does, or any school nurse carries out. All right, and we know as scientists that we have different units for measuring things. All right, you might find liters when you're measuring liquid. So if you had a bottle of water, you'd see, let's say, 1 liter, 2 liters. You know, when you're measuring liquid, you see that a lot. And when you're measuring a solid, you could have grams. When you're measuring distances, you can have meters and foot. So say it's 1 meter away, or 2 feet away, those kind of measurements. Okay, you have, science always has units with it. Same thing with maths. So you definitely will have units when you're measuring temperature. So what unit do we normally use for measuring temperature? So if I said, what is the amount of temperature in the room, and you wanted to measure it, first of all, you know that what I'm referring to is how hot or cold the room might be, or how much heat is present in the room. And then you try to measure it, and now you know that you use a thermometer to measure the amount of temperature that you need at that point in time. So you measure it, and then you say, okay, it's 25 something. You wouldn't just say it's 25. It has to be 25 something, because we use units for measuring. So, do you have an idea what it is? Okay, maybe you got it. Most times we use Celsius, sometimes Fahrenheit, but most times Celsius. But I'm going to give you the spelling of both, all right? So, if you ever find something like 10 degrees, and then you have a C there, it's just saying 10 degrees Celsius. So that's the amount or the measurement of the heat that you will find in a particular substance, or in a room, or whatever it is that you're measuring using a thermometer. All right, so 10 degrees Celsius, and this C is spelled as Celsius. Great, right? And you can either have that, or you can have, let's say, we're not going into the different types of measurements, because if something is in Fahrenheit, you can measure what that is in Celsius. All right, so it basically means the same thing, but it's 2 different words. All right, but we're not going into the how you can calculate Fahrenheit or Celsius from each other. I'm just telling you the spelling of the words and the units that you normally find when you're measuring temperature. All right, so if I had 10 degrees and you had an F there, that is for Fahrenheit. Okay, so Fahrenheit. So if you saw this, or you saw that anywhere, or you saw these kind of symbols, they are talking about temperature, then you'll know that whatever you see there is referring to temperature. It means someone has measured the temperature of a substance or something, and they're telling you how much heat is present in that substance or object. Okay, so that's the first part of today's lesson about Celsius and Fahrenheit. Okay, that's a simple part, that's a simple beginning to our lesson. Okay, so for now, you should know the meaning of temperature. You should know an instrument that we use for measuring temperature. And now you know the units that we normally find when we're talking about temperature. All right, so now let's move on to some of the examples that we have in our day-to-day life. Let's go on. let's move on to an interesting example of how temperature works. And we'll be looking at boiling water. When we need to boil water, what we have to do is quite simple. But, by the way, do you know how to boil water? Have you ever tried it before? Boiling water by yourself? Now, it's easy to boil water when you're using an electric kettle. All you have to do is put in the water into the kettle, put on the kettle, it's going to boil, and then when it's done, when it's ready, when the water boils, the kettle will automatically turn off, and that's simple. So, how does that work? How does the electric kettle know that the water is boiled? Because if you're boiling with a pot and you want properly boiled water, then you might need to get some tips from the electric kettle. So how does it do its work? Well, water boils at a specific temperature. And as soon as it gets to that temperature, the water starts making large bubbles, lots of noise, and it releases a lot of steam. Now, I'm sure you know all of that from boiling water at home. You'll find that your kettle is making a lot of noise. It might be making a wheezing sound, like, and making all that sound, or it's releasing a lot of steam. Steam is gas. You can get that from water when it's really boiled and it's hot and the water turns into gas. So you can see that, and it's known as steam. It's releasing a lot of bubbles. You can see bubbles in the water. It's bubbling up. Your kettle might even be shaking. All right? At that point in time, the kettle knows this water is boiled. Now, that temperature that allows us to know that water is boiled is 100 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to write that on the board. I'm going to say water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Now, when we started the lesson, I told you what these symbols mean, all right? So now that you see it, you understand that when I say degrees Celsius, if you put an E-L-S-I-U-S right there, you spelled Celsius. But this is the short form of writing it down. So you see a lot of this in textbooks. So water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, okay? So when it gets to that temperature, the water is boiled. Now, water must get to this temperature in order to boil. Once it starts boiling, the kettle will automatically go off. It's the same principle that you can apply if you're boiling water in a pot by yourself, okay? So, if you don't have a thermometer to use to measure that the water has gotten up to 100 degrees centigrade, you may not want to do that. So, what you need to do is just watch out for the same signs. Can you see lots of bubbles on boiling up from the bottom of the water? Can you see the bubbles coming up? Can you feel the steam all around? You know, it's really steamy. You might have put your water to a certain level, and now that it's boiled, it's like it's reduced a little bit. So some of the water is turned into gas. You have loads of steam. It's making a wheezing sound. Now, those are some of the signs that can let you know that the water is properly boiled. Okay? But just to give you more tips on how to check it out, here's a short Howcast video that can help you. Come on, watch it, and you can try the same at home.
How to boil water. There are simple tasks, and then there are incredibly simple tasks. Boiling water is even simpler than that. But hey, there's a first time for everything. You will need some water, a pot with a lid, and a stovetop. Step 1. Choose a pot with a greater volume than the amount of water you plan to boil. Do so in private so nobody's there to say, duh. Step 2. Pour fresh, cold tap water into the pot. Make sure there's at least 3 inches of space between the rim of the pot and the surface of the water. If you're boiling water to cook with, and not just for fun, you'll be adding something to it, so be sure to leave enough room for whatever you're cooking too. Step 3. Turn the burner to high, place the pot on the burner, and cover the pot with a lid that fits snugly. This keeps in the heat and helps the water boil faster. Step 4. They say a watched pot never boils, but that's not literally true. It's a figure of speech, a way of saying, be patient, things take time. So watch the pot all you want, pull up a chair, make a day of it. It could be very educational for someone like you. If you don't watch it, here's what you'll miss. First, steam will form between the water and the lid. Next, small bubbles will appear around the bottom and edges of the pot. Finally, the bubbles will become large enough to break the surface of the water. Step 5. Once large bubbles are flowing in steady streams from the bottom to the top of the pot, the water is boiling. That's it. You've done it. Cue the trumpets and congratulate yourself. Did you know? Boiling water is very hot.
Okay, that was a short video. Did you enjoy it? I know I did. That was from Howcast. And it's so simple to boil water, but I'm not going to assume that you know how to do it. Alright, a lot of kids out there don't know how to boil water. So you can try it out now. You can say, Mom, Dad, I know how to boil water. I'm going to help you boil it. Or you can help Mom out in the kitchen while she's trying to make some pasta. You can say, Mom, I'm going to help you boil the water for the pasta. And then you can carry on with making the pasta if you don't know how to make it already. Alright, so those are some of the examples of things that you can do at home and how we use temperature. Now let's move on to the next one. This one is an equally simple one. Very, very simple. Like the opposite of what we just learned about. Let's go on. Okay, now what's the opposite of boiling water? Have a quick think. The opposite of boiling water is freezing water, okay? The opposite of hot water is cold water. And if temperature has something to do with boiling water, then I'm sure temperature has something to do with freezing water, all right? Now let's learn about that. So, if we just learned about boiling water, and we said water boils only when it gets to 100 degrees centigrade. All right, I still have that on the board. Water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Now, if we said water only boils at this particular temperature, it means at 95 degrees centigrade, the water isn't boiled yet. At 99 degrees centigrade, the water is just about to boil. And it's nowhere near boiling at 70 degrees centigrade. It still has a long way to go. So it's only properly boiled when it's 100 degrees centigrade. Now, we also have temperature playing a part when we're talking about freezing. And we can use the exact same example, freezing water. Now, freezing is quite the opposite of boiling. In this case, the temperature needs to go down for the water to freeze, okay? So water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, and it becomes a solid or an ice block once it freezes. So I'm going to write that down. Water, probably use here. So I'll say, and then you're going to see why I'm writing it all the way down there. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. So water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. Or water gets frozen at 0 degrees Celsius. It becomes a block. Sometimes we call it ice block, all right? At that point in time, it's frozen. So if I had water at 100 degrees centigrade, it's boiling. If I had water at 0 degrees centigrade, it's gonna get frozen, okay? So those are the two temperatures that you can find water at. You can find water at other temperatures, but these are the two that we're gonna look at right now. So if I want to freeze some water, what do I need to do? Get it to 0 degrees centigrade. And if I want to boil water, what do I need to do? Make sure I can get it to 100 degrees centigrade and the water is going to boil. So that's just something that you need to know. And why is that? Well, I'm going to tell you more about that soon, okay? But if I wanted to freeze water, I just showed you how to boil some water. If I wanted to freeze water, it's quite simple. All I need to do is put it in my home freezer. And you've got a freezer at home, so you can do that yourself. Simple experiment. Take some water, put it in a container, lock it up in the freezer, and after some time, as long as your freezer is at the right temperature, which should be minus 18 degrees Celsius, all right? That's the perfect temperature your freezer should be at. Sometimes you have your fridge between 0 to 5 degrees Celsius, sometimes minus 5 degrees Celsius for some really cold fridges. But for your freezers, it should be at minus 18 degrees Celsius. And this is important so that, you know, you keep your stuff in your freezer and it's kept properly. All right. So if you put your water in that kind of proper, you know, in the freezer that is at the right temperature, minus 18 degrees Celsius, then your water will freeze up after a little bit of time, okay? Imagine minus 18 degrees Celsius, that's way, way, way below 0 degrees Celsius. So, what we're gonna do now, we've just learned that at 100 degrees Celsius, my water is boiling, and at 0 degrees Celsius, my water is frozen. Okay, so I can tie that together, right? I can summarize what I've learned just now with a diagram, okay? And I can use that diagram to show the different stages of water and what temperature how water will act at different temperatures, okay? So that's why I've written out this way and this way. And we've learned that we use an instrument to measure temperature. Do you remember the name of the instrument? Okay, we use a thermometer to measure temperature. And I'm gonna just take these two pens right here, and I'm gonna, let's see how I draw this. Okay, I'm gonna start it off as though it looks like a ruler, and I'm gonna put my stuff in here. I think I'll be more comfortable using this pen. Okay, it's fun if you know how to draw a lot of stuff, because science most of the time has to do with different types of drawings, so it's always nice to practice your drawings. So if I had that, and I'll say, okay, I just want to make sure that is pretty enough. Okay, I'm happier with that one. And I'll put my liquid. This will be my liquid for the fun of it. And just put my liquid here. Okay. This liquid has a name, but we're not going to talk about it in today's lesson. Okay. And some thermometers have different kind of substances in them. Some old thermometers have mercury in them. Others have some other substances, but we're just looking at temperature today. So if I drew that, and I need my measurements, right? And I said the most popular one is degrees Celsius. Okay, so if I had my measurements here, I'll say 1. I went till 10. So let's say that's my 5. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'll say, and then this will be my 0. So I've got 0, and I'll do it in tens. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I want that to look like a proper 0. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. Great. So if my water is at 100 degrees Celsius actually, it means that my water is boiling. And I could even draw a happy pot of boiling water just for fun. Okay? And if my water is, if my thermometer measures my water at 0 degrees Celsius, then my water is frozen or it's freezing. Okay, it's either frozen or it's freezing. And I can have my block from there, my ice block with a little water by the side. Okay, so that's just a little diagram to just put together everything that we've learned today. So this is my thermometer, and we said the thermometer is used to measure temperature. Okay, so water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. All right, so just a little thing to note: water is the only liquid that does that. It's the only liquid that will boil at 100 degrees Celsius, and it's the only liquid that will freeze up at 0 degrees Celsius. Cool, right? That's a fun fact. Well, that's all for today's lesson, all about temperature today. Go and practice some of those things, and if you can lay your hands on a thermometer, you can try measuring the temperature of different substances, including some of your friends at school who are willing to help you. All right? And that's all we need to know for today's lesson about temperature. We'll learn more and more about temperature in our coming lessons, but for now, that's all you need to memorize. Make sure that you go over your notes so that you don't forget the things that you've just been taught. All right? And right now, it's time for something very important. Do you know what it is? I know you do. It's time for our scripture for today. Make sure you memorize it. We'll be back. I hope you memorized today's scripture. It's important to know the Word of God, because that's the thing that will never, ever, ever, ever change, or never, ever, ever, ever fail. All right? So memorize the scripture for today. Well, that's all we have on our lesson on temperature. Look forward to more lessons. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions at all, or you want to send us a comment, just email easylearning@leveltv.co.uk. and we'll get back to you. And if you want to sponsor our Easy Learning programs, or you have books that you would like to give out to kids or children, well, it's the best place to do that. Send us an email and we'll get working with you. All right, that's all for today. Have fun learning, kids, and we'll see you next time on our Easy Learning lessons. Bye-bye.